Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of History's Greatest Battles. If you're not yet, please subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Our naval battle today altered so significantly the course of history in such a finite moment that any change to the outcome would have resulted in a direct influence on your life today if you live in the West. Queen Elizabeth, speaking to her mariners prior to them embarking, said, quote, "I am come amongst you, as you see at this time, not for my recreation and disport, but being resolved in the midst and heat of the battle, to live and die amongst you all, to lay down for my God and for my kingdom and my people, my honor and my blood, even in the dust. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too." Let us now experience the naval battle of the Spanish Armada.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 57, The Battle of the Spanish Armada, the 29th of July, 1588. English ships, 197. Spanish ships, 130. Spain's crushing defeat signaled the onset of its empire's long, inevitable decline. It shattered the illusion of invincibility that had shielded Spain for decades. In its place, England emerged as the undisputed naval power of the world. This victory at sea cleared the way for the English to begin their ambitious colonization of North America, setting the stage for a global empire that would reshape history.
In 1558, Elizabeth I seized the throne of England and found herself the sovereign of a fractured land, torn by infighting and weakened by its own divisions. Her realm was a fragile thing, beset by enemies at home and lacking strong alliances abroad. Yet in this sea of uncertainty, there was one ally, Spain, the mightiest empire in the known world, commanded by the iron hand of Philip II. Philip had recently been linked to England through his marriage to Elizabeth's Catholic predecessor, Mary Tudor. But when death took Mary, his ambition did not falter. He swiftly proposed to Elizabeth, seeking to keep his grip on a kingdom troubled by a rising Protestant faction he loathed, and a naval force he desired to bend to his will. Elizabeth, with her keen instincts, rejected Philip's hand, and though tensions simmered, they maintained a facade of cordiality. Philip even went so far as to offer his help in reclaiming Calais, England's last foothold on the European mainland. But the mask of friendship would soon crack, and the two would find themselves locked in a bitter and bloody rivalry. Fueled by fierce ambition for England's rise, Elizabeth embraced the Protestant legacy of her father, Henry VIII. She severed England's ties to Catholicism, declaring the Church of England supreme. This brazen act infuriated Philip, whose fervent Catholicism burned hot against this heretical affront. But it was England's relentless raids on Spanish treasure that truly ignited Philip's wrath. Elizabeth, knowing her navy was no match for Spain's imposing armada, took to the shadows. She unleashed privateers, state-sponsored pirates, to ravage Spanish galleons and plunder their colonies, each strike a dagger to Philip's pride and his coffers. Her pirates, men of ruthless daring like Francis Drake, Martin Frobisher, and John Hawkins, struck with merciless efficiency. They disrupted Spain's lucrative slave trade between Africa and the New World, pillaged Spanish ports from the Caribbean to the shores of South America, and seized treasure-laden ships destined for Spain. The stolen gold often funded Protestant rebellions across Europe, using Philip's own wealth to fight his Catholic campaigns. It was not enough that Elizabeth plundered Philip's coffers. She took those ill-gotten gains and funneled them into the Protestant revolts, tearing through Europe. In Holland, Philip's forces found themselves staring down armies bolstered by Spanish gold, a humiliating irony that only deepened his fury. At first, Philip hesitated to confront Elizabeth head-on, despite the urgings of his advisors. Throughout the 1570s, the relationship between Spain and England shifted like a pendulum, swinging from hostility to uneasy truce, dictated by the ever-changing power plays of Europe's royal courts. There were moments when the tension between the two kingdoms neared open war. In 1571, Philip lent his support to the Rodolphi conspiracy, a treacherous plot to see Elizabeth murdered and replaced by her Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Ever the cunning tactician, Elizabeth provided sanctuary to Dutch privateers who prowled the seas, relentlessly preying on Spanish vessels. Diplomatic relations between Spain and England broke, mended, and broke again as the tides of European politics dictated. By the late 1570s, Francis Drake had circumnavigated the globe, leaving a trail of burning Spanish settlements and captured ships in his wake. Meanwhile, Philip's power only grew as he seized the throne of Portugal, adding the vast wealth of its eastern empire to his already overflowing coffers. Elizabeth, keen to undercut Philip's ambitions, offered asylum to Don Antonio, a pretender to the Portuguese throne. She empowered him to issue letters of marque, allowing English captains to raid Spanish shipping under his banner, further stoking the flames of conflict. Elizabeth then turned to diplomacy, entering negotiations with Catherine de' Medici of France. But in 1582, a French attempt to confront Philip's navy at Terceira ended in catastrophe for France. The Spanish victory reaffirmed the invincibility of their fleet, a confidence they had carried since their triumph over the Turks at Lepanto in 1571. Despite England's support of France in the failed naval gambit, Philip's council again pressed him to strike in England, yet once more he held back. His resolve would not harden until two pivotal events shattered his impatience. In 1584, another plot to assassinate Elizabeth led to a fresh rupture between England and Spain. Undeterred, Elizabeth intensified her campaign against Spanish shipping and Caribbean outposts. Drake and Frobisher, with bloodlust in their hearts, eagerly answered the call. And in 1585, Elizabeth dispatched 5,000 troops under the Earl of Leicester to bolster the Dutch after the assassination of William of Orange. These bold moves, military interventions atop years of espionage and religious strife, demanded a reckoning. The final blow came in February of 1587 when Elizabeth signed the death warrant for her Catholic nemesis, Mary, Queen of Scots. With Mary's blood spilled, Philip's rage could no longer be contained. Within weeks, he commanded the assembly of the Spanish Armada, a fleet meant to crush England beneath the weight of his fury. The mastermind behind the invasion plan was the Marquis of Santa Cruz, Spain's most seasoned and feared commander, a veteran of Lepanto and Terceira. He envisioned a force of unparalleled might, 510 ships, and over 94,000 men, a fleet designed not to merely defeat England, but to obliterate it. Philip tempered these grand ambitions, reducing the Armada to 130 ships. The goal was clear: secure the English Channel and join forces with the Duke of Parma, who was waging war in the Netherlands, poised to lead the invasion of England. Parma, embroiled in a brutal war against Protestant rebels in Holland, was widely regarded as the greatest military commander of the era. With Santa Cruz at the helm of the Armada and Parma ready to spearhead the invasion, England's chances of survival appeared grim. The coming storm promised to overwhelm them. But before the Armada could even take form, Francis Drake struck, sensing weakness. In April 1587, leading a fleet of 23 ships, he launched a preemptive raid on Spain itself, moving faster than even the cautious Elizabeth could restrain him. Elizabeth, wary of plunging fully into war, doubted England's strength and balked at the immense costs. But Drake had no such hesitation. By the time his fleet arrived at the port of Cadiz, he had already razed Spanish ships and looted vital supplies, his thirst for destruction pushing him on toward Lisbon. On May the 10th, Drake unleashed terror on the Spanish ships anchored at Caseus Bay, obliterating 24 vessels without mercy. From there, he pressed on to Cape St. Vincent, laying waste to the Portuguese base and demolishing Spain's supply of barrel staves, essential for preserving the provisions needed for the invasion. His assault left the Spanish preparations in tatters. Drake's rampage might have gone further still had he not been forced to withdraw for lack of reinforcements. Before turning back to England, he prowled the waters near the Azores and seized the San Felipe, a treasure ship brimming with riches. Yet more valuable than its cargo was the trove of intelligence it carried on the Spanish and Portuguese trade routes to India, information that would lay the groundwork for England's future empire. Despite Drake's devastating blows, Spain pressed on, and over the next months, the Armada began to take shape. Meanwhile, Elizabeth wavered, her mind torn between the fear of war with Spain and the necessity of it. Parma dangled the prospect of peace talks, but both sides knew it was a charade. Neither would yield until the other was broken. As the storm clouds gathered, England found an unexpected but vital ally, the Dutch fleet. Though small, this fierce squadron blockaded Flanders, cutting Parma off from coordinating with the Armada, a move that would cripple the Spanish invasion plans before they even began. By early 1588, the pieces were in place. Santa Cruz, the architect of the Armada, had painstakingly assembled the invasion force, and it seemed destiny had chosen him to lead. But fate intervened. He died suddenly in the spring, leaving Spain without its greatest naval mine. Command of the Armada passed to the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a nobleman with royal favor and high rank, but a man who had never set foot in battle, let alone sailed into one. He was inexperienced and ill-suited to the task, yet Philip had faith in the seasoned Don Diego de Valdez, his second-in-command, to steady the fleet. The plan was clear. Once the Armada united with Parma, the general would assume command of the invasion. Meanwhile, Elizabeth selected Lord Howard of Effingham to lead the English defense. Howard was a competent mariner, but no naval genius. Fortunately, he was flanked by the likes of Drake, Frobisher, and Hawkins, each a master in their own right, and Howard was wise enough to heed their counsel when the hour grew dark. Howard urged Elizabeth to allow a preemptive strike against the Armada, backed by his captain's insistence, but the Queen refused to act prematurely. Santa Cruz's death and whispers of storms scattering the Armada gave Elizabeth false hope that the invasion would be delayed. To her captains, however, this only made an early strike more urgent. But when word reached her that the Armada had indeed set sail from Lisbon, Elizabeth did little more than permit Howard's fleet to patrol England's shores, unwilling to go on the offensive. The Armada departed Lisbon on May 20th, but soon met a furious storm that forced them to seek shelter at La Coruña. It was there that they discovered that the provisions, hastily packed in barrels of unseasoned wood, had spoiled. The once mighty fleet was left crippled by rot and hunger, its crews and ships barely ready for the battle ahead. After gathering fresh supplies, the Armada set sail again on July 12th, and by the 19th, they had rounded Brittany and entered the English Channel. That same day, English lookouts spotted the Great Fleet. According to legend, the captains of the English fleet calmly finished a game of bowling before turning to their ships, ready to meet the Armada head-on. Under the ghostly light of the July moon, the two fleets caught sight of one another. The English, bolstered by favorable winds, readied their sleek, agile vessels. Their sailors, hardened and sharp, knew the seas better than their Spanish adversaries. This was their battlefield, and they prepared to make Spain bleed. The opening clash was swift and brutal, with the English emerging dominant. Their smaller, long-range guns tore into the Spanish ships from a distance the Armada could not counter. The Spanish, used to closing in for boarding actions, found themselves helpless to retaliate against the English barrage that rained down with deadly precision. The Armada's strength was in its heavy cannon and the disciplined soldiers aboard, trained for close combat and boarding actions. But these tactics were relics of an earlier age, and the English captains knew it. Their ships darted through the waves, never allowing the Spanish to get close enough to use their brutish guns or unleash their soldiers waiting with swords drawn. In frustration, Medina Sidonia confessed, quote, "The enemy's ships were so fast and handy that there was nothing that could be done with them," end quote. The humiliation deepened when the Spanish lost the San Salvador, the vessel carrying the fleet's paymaster and its treasure, gold, blood, and the morale of the Spanish sailors slipped beneath the waves. Yet the English missed their chance for a crushing blow. As the Armada retreated eastward, Drake broke formation in the darkness to seize a drifting Spanish prize. His hunger for plunder sowed confusion in the English ranks, delaying what could have been the Armada's swift destruction in those critical hours. Both fleets pressed eastward, with the Spanish making for the Isle of Wight to establish a foothold. But the English gave them no rest. Relentlessly hounding their every move, the English forced the Armada to squander precious ammunition and futile long-range exchanges, leaving the Spanish gunners frustrated and their powder stores dangerously low. As the English hounded this retreating fleet, Medina Sidonia, recognizing his weakening position, abandoned the plan to seize the Isle of Wight. Instead, he turned his ships toward Calais, hoping to find a safe harbor and join forces with Parma there, a desperate bid to salvage the invasion. To the English, this once mighty armada, now scattering toward the French coast, was like prey driven by wolves. Medina Sidonia limped into Calais on July 27th, anchoring his battered fleet in the narrow straits, vulnerable and exposed. Now, though reinforced by fresh ships from the Thames under the command of Seymour and Winter, Lord Howard realized his moment had come. Gathering his captains aboard his flagship, the Ark Royal, on July 28th he held council. The English had the Armada where they wanted it, cornered and disorganized. It was time to strike. Unwilling to wait for the small fishing boats that had been summoned for a daring plan, Howard and his captains took matters into their own hands. They stripped 8 of their ships, loaded them with combustibles, and sent them into the night with the wind behind them. Fire ships aimed straight at the heart of the Armada. The Spanish had anticipated the fire ships and posted guards to intercept them. But in the early hours of July 29th, the English lit their vessels and unleashed chaos upon the enemy. As the flames roared toward them, the Spanish captains in panic slashed their anchor lines and scrambled to escape. The once ordered fleet descended into chaos, ships colliding, scattering, and drifting apart. Though the fire ships themselves claimed no direct victims, their psychological effect was devastating. By dawn, the Armada lay scattered along the coast, its once formidable formation shattered, its captains disoriented, and its invasions now in ruins. This chaos sealed the Armada's fate, and with it the collapse of the entire invasion. Medina Sidonia, his powder spent from the long pursuit through the Channel, knew he could not stand against the English in open battle. His fleet was scattered, his men demoralized, and he was out of options. Cut off from Parma's forces, which lay trapped by Dutch blockades near Bruges, Medina Sidonia had no hope of regrouping. With no other path left, he issued the fateful order: retreat. His fleet would attempt to circle northward around Scotland, a desperate gamble to save what remained of the once proud Armada. Medina Sidonia's only faint hope was to land in Scotland, perhaps rallying Catholic forces there to rise against Elizabeth, but this was a dream built on nothing but desperation, and he knew it. Instead, he commanded his shattered fleet to make the long and perilous journey back to Spain. Their provisions, already scarce, were woefully insufficient for such a voyage. The brutal gales of the North Atlantic, coupled with starvation, began to carve away at the Armada, ship by ship. What had begun as a fleet of 130 ships, the pride of Spain, was reduced to half by the time the survivors limped back to Cadiz in September. The Channel skirmishes, the chaos off Calais, and the merciless storms off Scotland and Ireland had taken their toll. The Armada returned broken, its ambitions crushed. Medina Sidonia, his spirit as battered as his fleet, wrote to Philip in defeat, quote, "The troubles and miseries we have suffered cannot be described to your majesty. They have been greater than have ever been seen in any voyage before." End quote. In stark contrast, the English lost not a single ship in the battle, a victory both total and astounding. The aftermath of this battle reshaped the very foundations of naval warfare. The tactics Spain had relied upon, close-quarter grappling, ramming, and boarding, were now relics, swept aside by the precision and range of cannon fire. This was the dawn of a new age at sea where ships would no longer clash like medieval knights, but would rain death from a distance. This battle heralded the true arrival of the cannon as the dominant force on the seas. Ironically, the Spanish had more heavy guns than the English, but their short range rendered them useless against the nimble English ships whose lighter, long-range cannons dictated the terms of engagement. Spanish ships lumbered forward like giants, but they were picked apart before they could even bring their power to bear. The English culverins, though smaller and less devastating per shot, held the advantage in range. These cannons became the harbingers of a revolution in shipbuilding. In the decades that followed, innovations in artillery and naval design elevated the man of war to the undisputed ruler of the seas. England had shown that firepower and maneuverability, not brute strength, would define naval supremacy. The old formations, where ships lined up side by side for ramming, were already fading as the Armada battle raged. A new formation, line astern, emerged, where ships followed one another and unleashed devastating broadsides in succession. Whether the English employed this strategy intentionally or stumbled upon it, the result was undeniable. It transformed naval tactics forever, turning ships into floating fortresses of cannon fire. But the true impact of the Armada's defeat was political. The Spanish Empire, which had dominated the world stage since 1492, had now peaked. From this moment onward, Spain began its inevitable, slow descent. The defeat marked the end of its unchecked power and signaled the weakening of the mighty Catholic Empire. The ramifications rippled across Europe. The Dutch secured their independence. The Protestant cause gained momentum, and Spain's once unstoppable military began to falter. Although the 30 Years' War would ultimately solidify Protestantism's hold on Europe, Spain's ability to crush these heretical movements began to crumble after 1588. Philip's once vast resources were stretched thin, his ambition outstripping his power. In the New World, Spain's momentum came to a grinding halt. For nearly a century, its empire had expanded relentlessly since Columbus first claimed lands in its name. But after the Armada's defeat, Spain's northward ambitions faded. Though Spain would continue to dominate much of Latin America for centuries to come, its dreams of further conquest in North America vanished. Spain turned from expansion to defense. Meanwhile, England's star began to ascend. Empowered by the strength of their navy, English captains now had the freedom to set sail into the wider world with bolder ambitions. With Spain's shadow no longer looming large, English explorers turned their eyes to North America, seizing the opportunity to plant colonies and carve out their own empire. The result was a tectonic shift in the political and cultural landscape of the Americas. North America would come to be shaped by English values, English politics, and English religion, while Central and South America, under Spain's grip, would forever be shaped by Latin culture. The stage was set for the division of the New World, English in the north, Spanish in the south. But the spoils of this victory did not end with the Americas. England's newfound naval strength opened the doors to India, and with it, access to the vast wealth of trade that would fuel the rise of the British Empire. The defeat of the Armada planted the seeds of an empire that would one day stretch across the globe. 1588 marked a turning point in world history. The old order, dominated by Spanish and Mediterranean powers, began to crumble, making way for the rise of England and Northern Europe. The balance of power shifted, and England, with its newfound naval supremacy, was poised to claim its place as the dominant force in the world. Had the Armada succeeded, had it linked with Parma's forces and launched an invasion, the course of history would have been unrecognizable. Even if England had managed to resist full conquest, its rise as a world power would have been delayed by decades, if not centuries. England was not yet the military juggernaut it would become, and Spanish victory could have crippled its ambitions for generations. If Spain had conquered England, its dominion could have extended across all of Europe, cementing Catholicism's dominance, a dominance it had held since Constantine's time. the Protestant movement would have been crushed, and Spain's reach would have been unchallenged on the continent. The implications for the New World would have been staggering. Spanish influence would have spread further into North America, and with the wealth of 2 continents under its control, Spain's empire could have become nearly unstoppable. Its power would have seemed limitless, shaping the future of the world in ways we can only imagine.